Thank you.
Go live.
Yeah, it's all good.
Very cool. We're now live. So, today's stream I have Olicsa, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, pretty good.
Yes, and Olicsa, you have some, you're researching anarcho-capitalism, you have some sort of qualms with it. Do you want to just, I suppose, get started with any one of those you find the need to go for, or introduce yourself, whatever you want?
Yeah, of course. I can just start by introducing. My online name is Olicsa. I'm a student from Denmark, and right now one of my main interests in my free time is researching anarcho-capitalism. Before that, I've had some experience with researching veganism and the philosophy behind that. And now anarcho-capitalism is my main interest. But I have some problems that I both have thought of myself, and also I've heard from other people when talking to them. And I'm just curious how a well-read anarcho-capitalist would respond to it. So there will be some arguments against the justification of the non-aggression principle, and there will also be some practical problems I have with a society running that way. And that should, yeah.
So I suppose,
So first,
oh, sorry, you go.
No, you just say what you want to say.
Sure. So I suppose I could get in with my justification of the non-aggression principle if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So my basic argument is that we have this thing called scarcity, which means that two people can't use the same thing at the same time, and so ethics can legitimately tell us what do you do with scarcity, right? If you come into a conflict where, Crusader and Friday, they're trying to use the same stick for two different things, they can't. Those are mutually exclusive actions. How do you deal with that situation? And there are three possible solutions you could have to that. There's one, I call it the law of the jungle, where just anything goes, who cares? Just ignore the problem. Maybe you think it isn't a problem. Whatever, anything like that, that falls under the purview of the law of the jungle. Then there's the non-aggression principle, which says that the way to deal with conflicts is you should avoid conflicts, and that whoever started the conflict, whoever is the aggressor, is in the wrong, and they shouldn't be allowed to do the action. That's the non-aggression principle. And then the other option would be just some mix between the two, where sometimes it's fine to aggress, sometimes it's not okay. And basically, the law of the jungle, I think, is false, and mixed law is also false. And so that would leave us only with the option of the non-aggression principle. I could go over the individual falsehoods of those other systems if you want.
Okay. So my first question to that will be sort of like, aren't there also some other alternatives to those three systems, such as consequentialism or deontology?
So I would consider consequentialism a form of mixed law, because it's saying it's fine to aggress if the consequences would be good, whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
And like deontology, that just means like duty ethics. So you might have a non-aggression principle duty ethics. You could do that, or you could have an aggression duty ethics where it's your duty to aggress, or you could have duty ethics where it's law of the jungle, where it's always your duty to aggress. But it would still have to fall into one of these categories.
Okay. Then, I mean, that seems fine so far. I have a problem with, or one of the things I've been thinking about is self-ownership. How we can actually prove it. And I have some questions for you. So this stems from argumentation ethics. Basically, when you engage in an argument, you assume you have exclusive ownership of yourself, right? Am I getting that correctly?
Yes, that would be the argumentation ethics approach.
Okay. Then my question will be, is it possible that you're under some sort of mind control, in which case it would not be possible for you to have exclusive self-ownership, since there's some unknown third party which is controlling your mind? Would that be a fair critique?
Yeah, so I was just having to write that down in full. So basically, it's possible for other people to possess your body. I don't know if that full mind control would be possible. It's certainly possible for someone to possess your body. But I don't think that possession is sufficient to demonstrate an ownership claim. So the way I get to self-ownership is that you just have this obvious objective link to your body. It's undeniable. Like if I try to start asserting that I have a greater link over your body, you can just demonstrate that it's directly connected to your mind, right? And moreover, if what we're concerned about is conflicts, well, in the base case of a conflict, it wouldn't be a conflict over external goods. It would be a conflict over bodies, right? And if we have a situation where Crusoe and Friday are on an island, and Crusoe tries to start using Friday's body, well, who would we identify as the aggressor there? Who is the person who is initiating this conflict? Clearly, Friday was already using his body for something, and then Crusoe started that conflict. So, self-ownership just has to be the case. And there's also, Murray Rothbard has an argumentum contrario for self-ownership that I could go for if you want, but I think that's sufficient for now.
Okay, but if I'm not mistaken, self-ownership is the exclusive control over your own body.
Well, it's the right to exclusively control your body.
The right to exclusive control over your own body. Then I have a question. What if we did some brain transplant and we switched the brains and the minds of two people and their bodies? Yeah, how would ownership work in that case?
So that would be a lot like if I amputated my arm. So if I amputate my arm, then I can abandon my arm. I could leave it into nature and just walk off, and then I no longer have this link to my arm. It's just somebody else could come along and homestead it if they want. And the most radical, most reductio case of that would be this brain transplant situation, where you're taking my brain out of my head, so the entire rest of my body has been abandoned, and then it's been put into a robot body or somebody else's body or whatever, right? And so that would be effectively transferring ownership of bodies.
Okay, so if some third party when Crusoe and Friday were sleeping, they just switched their brains, then Crusoe's brain is now in Friday's body, so Crusoe has the ownership of Friday's body. Is that what you're saying?
So I think if it was some random guy came along and did this body swappers thing, it would be their bodies would have been stolen, but I'm not sure whether it would be possible to reverse this or anything like that. I would have to know more about whether this is something that can easily be reversible, like they just, go into a machine that swaps them back. I don't know, right?
Okay.
Like if it's an irreversible thing, then yeah, they probably now have control of, they now probably own their new body, because there is no way to undo it.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. I just thought of something. If we can go back to the law of the jungle, mixed law, and non-aggression principle, can you give your justification for why the mixed law would be problematic?
Sure. So basically, like, mixed law comes in two different sorts of forms itself. There's the class-based and the whim-based, and I can give all sorts of examples on how they fall into either class-based or whim-based. So whim-based would be something like, the king said that this should happen, so it should happen. The king said that I now own your property, so I now own your property. And this, previously, in the paper where I lay out this argument, I proved that the law of the jungle is false by showing that it's based on whim worship, which is based on the primacy of consciousness, which is itself a stolen concept fallacy. So the whim-based is out on those grounds, that it's based on a stolen concept. Now, for the class,
quickly explain.
Oh, sorry.
Quickly explain the primacy of consciousness.
Sure. So the primacy of consciousness is any sort of position within metaphysics which takes consciousness as being the primary. So it's something like God said XYZ, and that's why XYZ is the case. So instead of stopping at existence exists, they ask, well, who made existence exist? Right? Other examples of this, it's not just religion. Another example of this would be, I think, therefore I am. It's starting with I think. I think is the most primary. It's taking the mind as being what is fundamental and then trying to prove existence based on the mind. And the reason why this is fallacious is because a consciousness is a consciousness of something, right? So you can't have the concept of consciousness without first having the concept of what you're conscious of, namely existence.
And how does this apply to the law of the jungle?
Sure. So the law of the jungle is basically just saying, do whatever the hell you want. Justifiability is irrelevant. Reason is the slave of the passions, yada, 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 yada. So this is whim worship. And whim worship itself rests upon whim epistemology. That if you will something to be true, then it is true. Right? And a whim epistemology, for that to be the case, for it to be the case that if you want something, then it's fine, that relies on your wants. I want this thing to be the controller of reality, rather than the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I would just. That also makes. It also makes sense. That thing. I'll just have a question. Is it possible that someone says that there is no such thing as truth to moral statements, such as, I think it's error theory, I'm not quite sure. Basically, it would go into none of these three categories, basically saying none of them are correct.
Yes, so that would be one such way that you could deal with this argument, is saying that moral claims don't have any truth value. I reject that moral claims don't have truth value, and I have never seen a convincing reason for why they wouldn't have truth value. Like, it's that sort of idea is basically just Hume's guillotine. It's asserting arbitrarily that there's some distinction between facts and values, that you can't get to proper values from just the realm of is, that you can't get from is to ought, right? But he never proved that you can't get from is to ought, and in fact, his claim that you can't get from is to ought is itself reliant upon ought statements, namely epistemic norms. So I consider it to be a completely arbitrary claim that you can't have factual values.
Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure about that, because the way I see it is that it could be seen that morals are basically a man-made concept to try and explain different things within society, like how different people see different actions as differently good or bad, and we try to explain it through morals and come up with these systems. And also these actions are also just very, how can I say, like primitive explanations of different things, such as one thing I could elucidate to is murder, which is the intentional killing of a human being. But at the deepest level of understanding, what is intention? And is it just our subjective, arbitrary explanation of something? Is it possible that in a human brain there is 60% of it that has the intention of killing and 40% which doesn't? How does this factor into this definition of murder? And I think it's a bunch of basically all of these actions are just very arbitrary and very loosely defined actions to try and explain something that can't be explained.
Well, so like, I would consider that claim itself to be arbitrary. Like, you'd need to, I don't know if you endorse that opinion or whatever, but like a person who does endorse that opinion would have to come along and say like, hey, here's why there is no such thing as truth in ethics. Some people have attempted to do this. I am aware of Hume's guillotine trying to do this, but it defeats itself. So that claim needs to be shown somehow. That ought statements aren't just another type of his statement.
But isn't there also like a burden of proof on the other side to say that there are such things as true moral statements?
Well, like, let's say I make the claim, I'm making Zulu's guillotine, right? And I'm saying there is no such thing as true statements in meteorology, that you can't get from the realm of non-meteorological facts to the realm of meteorological facts. So any claim anybody makes about what the weather's going to be, any prediction they make in meteorology, that's just expressing their own subjective feelings. Would you consider you or me to have the burden of proof there?
But isn't it possible to have the agnostic position saying you don't know if there are such things as true moral statements?
It's possible, but in my Zulu's guillotine, would you consider that I have the burden of proof, or would meteorologists, would they have the burden of proof to show that you can have factual claims in meteorology?
I think it's the one who makes the positive claim first, or in this case, I guess it would be a negative claim. So it would be you who has the burden of proof.
Right, because I'm saying that there is some distinction between claims outside of meteorology and claims in meteorology. And the same is true for ethics, right? If somebody's claiming that there's some distinction between ethical claims and non-ethical claims, they have to show what that distinction is. They have to show that this gap even exists in the first place.
Yeah, but again, if someone just doesn't take a position on this and they just say I'm agnostic, I don't know if there are morals, true moral statements, then the burden of proof would be on the person who believes there is true moral statements and is trying to convince the other person.
Well, I mean, I could give a positive. I mean, I think I did give a positive case for. No, I didn't give a positive. Sorry. I could give a positive case for where I believe for any true moral claim that I think there is, but I still think that just bringing an agnostic into the situation, like let's say if there was this debate between meteorologists and anti-meteorologists, where the anti-meteorologists are claiming that you can't have meteorological facts, just bringing an agnostic into that room doesn't suddenly change what the burden of proof is, right?
Yeah.
And so it also
but
doesn't.
If it's the case that neither.
Like
yeah,
saying,
but I
like,
think
say,
it's kind of a false comparison.
Well, why is that?
Because in the case of ethics, you're making the difference between descriptive statements and prescriptive statements. In the case of the meteorology, it's descriptive and descriptive on both sides. So
right,
I think it's kind of a false analogy.
But you're assuming there that Hume's guillotine is correct, right? Because you're saying that there is a difference between descriptive and prescriptive, that they are in different realms. But I'm saying that's an arbitrary claim.
Okay. That makes sense. So you wouldn't... So if I make the case that I say it's unhealthy to eat candy, would that lead to an odd statement? that we ought not eat candy, or is it only if it's immoral to eat candy, then we ought not eat candy in this case?
So like you could make a claim like, let's change candy for like arsenic or something, where it's like arsenic is just bad for your life. It's going to immediately kill you. Like let's just assume there are no circumstances where arsenic is good for you or whatever. Like it's not used in medicine or whatever. I don't know if it is. So you could make that claim that, well, we need to have a standard for value here, and the only rational standard for value is life, because it's only because you have life that value means anything. That's why a rock doesn't have values, right? It's only for living beings that they need to constantly keep pursuing life, because they have the alternative between existence and non-existence. Other inert matter doesn't have this choice. So, with life as the standard of value, something like arsenic is objectively bad for life. It is given that you are alive, right? You can say arsenic is going to kill you. Dying is bad, therefore, don't eat arsenic.
Okay, I have 2 comments to that. I'll start with one of them. I heard you say in a prior debate that you wouldn't steal a penny to save the entire human species.
Mm-hmm.
Now, doesn't that, I mean, it is a rights violation when you steal the penny, but aren't you also like going against your own principles of life being a thing that gives value? So basically letting all life, like having these billions of rights violations because there's one minor thing that has nothing to do with life, is in the way.
Yeah, so when I'm taking life as the standard, I'm sort of meaning life in a holistic sense. Not just pure survival, but the good life, right? And I don't think it's I think there are certain circumstances where it's no longer possible to live the good life, and then you just die. So I think the rational man, who truly understands ethics and everything, he would not be able to flourish. He would not live the good life if he was a parasite who steals pennies in order to sustain himself. At that point, he becomes a vampire, and he can no longer flourish as a vampire.
I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. So let me make it more clear. Let's say there's an alien civilization who says, you should go ahead and steal this 1 grain of sand from this person, or else we're going to kill every single human on planet Earth. Would then not be permissible to steal this 1 grain of sand?
It would not be permissible. And if he's a rational man, he would be racked with guilt for this, right? He would not be able to flourish anymore because he would be so guilty that he is violating someone's property rights.
Well, I think depends what you mean rational man, because I've heard that anarcho-capitalists use rational as in purposeful, and I don't see how.
Yeah, so the Austrians are basically using rational, meaning that they have the faculty of reason. I'm using it in the sense of he is properly using his faculty of reason, that he is not evading reality, that he's actively thinking.
But why would he be so ridden with guilt? Because he did one very, very minor rights violation, and therefore prevented the entire human civilization from dying out, which you say life is the thing that gives value. So I don't really see how you're allowed to let all life go out because one minor little rights violation, which doesn't affect life in any significant negative way, needs to be committed.
So, I don't know how it's possible to claim one rights violation to be a bigger violation of rights than another. So, I would consider that scenario to be identical to somebody killing 30 people in order to save a penny.
Wait, so what are you saying is equivalent to killing 30 people to save a penny?
Yeah, because I don't think it's possible to claim one rights violation is more a rights violation than the other. I think it's binary. Either something is a violation of rights or it's not.
Okay, so there's no... So I'm probably misunderstanding something, but does that mean that in the legal sense, if someone steals a penny, it would be equivalent to murder?
Yes, in that they're both
It would.
violations of rights.
Okay, but what I think is, since you talk about life as the thing that gives value, I would suppose that you give more credence to life existing than this penny. You know?
Yeah, elsewhere in ethics, like if somebody gave me the offer, hey, either I'm going to kill you or I'm going to steal a penny from you, I'd take the penny 10 times out of 10. I think you should take the penny 10 times out of 10. But that doesn't mean...
Oh, wait, say that again. I think I misheard you.
Yeah, so if somebody came up to me and they had a gun and they said, either I'm going to shoot you or I'm going to steal a penny from you, I think I should give them the penny so I can save my life.
Okay, yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
But like,
but you're not allowed
as it
to
comes
take
to law, I don't think there is any way to decide which rights violation is more of a rights violation than a different rights violation.
Okay, so I will have this question regarding self-defense. So, for instance, say that you have to steal a penny to save your own life. Would that count as self-defense in that you're violating a right to save your own right?
So
I would guess no. It's not permissible, I would guess.
Yeah, so it would depend on like
to steal the penny.
The specific circumstances, like because there is such a thing as a human shield situation, where you're basically where you're allowed to shoot through the human shield to stop an aggressor. So it would depend on like the exact circumstances, and maybe you're just being like puppeted around as a slave, right? That argument could be made. So like there are alternatives, but if it's like straight up, you're choosing to steal a penny, and you are taking that action yourself, then yeah, it's evil.
Okay, then Mike.
It's also worth noting that there are also social norms do play a role. So it might be, and you probably are in a society where the social norm says that if the entire world's going to be blown up, then the person's not going to care that you took the penny. But then it's no longer the same situation, right? Because then it would no longer be theft. But if we have it in the scenario that it has to be theft, that it has to be stealing the penny, then it is evil and you shouldn't do it.
Okay. So going to that, this is because you believe people have like a negative right not to be aggressed against, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in the case of self-defense against an aggressor, like a direct aggressor against you, let's say they are right now attempting to kill you, in which case you use lethal force to stop the aggressor. But in this case, just because the other person is trying to kill you does not mean that they magically lose that negative right. They still have that negative right, and you still broke that negative right in order to save your own life. How are those two different?
Sure. So basically, the principle under which defense is justified is Anthony. I think it's Anthony. Yeah, Anthony de Sais's "let exclusion stand" principle, where basically he points out that what it means to have a property right, in one level of analysis, one angle on it, is that you have a right to exclude people from a certain thing. So if I own a field, that means that I have the right to exclude people from that field. And so that's how I justify defense, at least. I don't know if other people do it the same. So if you are engaged in an aggression against me, you're trying to stab me, you are trying to invade my objective property borders, of my body with your knife, and so I am allowed to take whatever is required in order to exclude you from that. And that might include killing you, right? That might be required to exclude you. But that doesn't mean that I'm allowed to do whatever I want with you, right? So let's say, let's change this now slightly to where you are just standing on my garden. I want you to get off my garden. And the way I'm required to do that is by grabbing you by the arm and escorting you out. I wouldn't be allowed to, whilst I'm doing this, start stabbing you in the arm with a needle. Because stabbing you in the arm with a needle, it's completely irrelevant to getting you off my lawn, right?
Mm-hmm. So basically, your property rights overrides the other person's negative rights.
It's not that it's overriding or anything. It's that they're the one initiating the conflict there. So there is some conflict over certain resources. And the way you resolve these conflicts is by excluding the aggressor from these resources. And excluding the aggressor involves sometimes physically grabbing them and throwing them away. Right? And there is indeed a conflict over the use of their arm. But they initiated that conflict.
Mm-hmm. So basically, because they initiate the conflict over your property, then you get the right to just kind of dismiss their negative rights as long as it's proportional and makes sense. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, that is one way to
what I'm
think
getting
of it.
from you.
Yes, because at the end of the day, like property rights, on my legal theory at least, other people describe it in different ways, but I think mine is best. Property rights aren't the fundamental. It's not that I start with property rights and then start doing other things. I start with only the non-aggression principle, and from that, it implies a certain theory of property rights.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes sense. Okay, I might get back to that later, but for now it seems quite clear to me. Then I don't think we made it to explaining why mixed law would be incoherent. And actually, one more thing I want to add before we go to that. What about the theory of moral intuitionism? Would that also go under basically the mixed law?
Yes, that would be a form of mixed law, and moreover, it could also be law of the jungle because it's just I intuit it this way, so therefore, right? Moreover, any form of intuitionism I regard as just completely primacy of consciousness openly. Now, the reason for this is that the intuitionist has as his standard of reality, his standard of truth, is I think this, I feel this way. It's a certain thought process is the fountain of truth rather than this is this way. Right? So any form of intuitionism I hold is primacy of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. All right. Then that makes sense. So primacy of consciousness is basically the reason for why both the law of the jungle and mixed law is incorrect.
Yeah.
All right. I think my other contentions were mainly with argumentation ethics, but you didn't really bring that up, so I think I can just skip over that.
Mm.
Okay, one question I do have. I saw your debate with Perspective Philosophy, and you claimed when he gave you the scenario of a sandwich maker who denies giving food to a starving man, you claimed that action was objectively immoral, but the sandwich maker should there's not an ought for him to give the man food, the starving man food, despite it being objectively immoral in your view. So first of all, I would ask, how is it objectively? How do you justify this action being objectively immoral, seeing as it doesn't violate the NAP? And also, why doesn't this lead to an ought like the other statements, which are either moral or immoral?
So basically, I don't know if I held the same position back then. It was a while ago. But my response to it now would be that you have a responsibility for any random person you come across where you don't know them, they're a stranger. You have the responsibility to treat them as a rational person until they prove otherwise, because they can be rational, and they have to specifically choose and specifically show that they are being irrational, that they aren't worthy of your time or effort. So if you have this starving man in front of you, and there is no evidence to show that he's rotten, that he should die, it's probably, almost certainly, you're going to have a much better life for yourself to have this additional person around who you can trade with, right? Having an entire other person is way more valuable than having a sandwich. So I think the sandwich maker should give the starving man food. But if he has evidence that this starving man is just a total moocher, maybe he's like a complete parasite on society, like he might be a mugger, like he's just a rotten individual, and this guy knows, the sandwich maker knows these things about him, then he shouldn't help him keep on his parasitism. He should leave him to his devices, and hopefully he'll starve or become better.
Okay. So this time you will say there is an ought claim that the sandwich maker ought give the starving man food if the starving man seems to be rational. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
But isn't that kind of infringing on the sandwich maker's negative rights by you're not even not telling him what
I'm not saying the sandwich
do,
maker has to give him food. I'm just saying the sandwich maker should give him food. And I'm not saying that the starving man should steal any food. He certainly shouldn't do that.
So what's the difference between ought and has to?
So has to would mean that it would be a crime for the sandwich maker to not give food. I don't think the sandwich maker is committing any crimes by not giving the food. I just think he should do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in this case you would... Okay, this kind of changes my perspective on ought statements in general. Would this also mean that if we have the claim we ought not commit murder, that it technically at basis level would not be a crime? Or am I misunderstanding something?
So,
because it's not that it has to, it's only should.
So I treat law as a subset of ethics. And so the reason why you shouldn't commit murder is because it's a crime to commit murder, right? Those are different aspects. And sort of the difference, positively, is that if you just do something immoral which isn't a crime, it might suck and people might disassociate with you or whatever, but they have no right to punish you. But if you do something that is a crime, if you murder someone, then the heir to that victim, they have a right to kill you, right? Which is a very different sort of thing. Whereas if you just call them a mean name, well, there's no punishment that can take forth, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. So you're basically saying we can have these ought statements with people ought to have some duties in some cases where that's basically they should help this rational person, although they don't have to. It's not a crime not to help them, but they should help them.
Yeah.
It's basically what you're saying. Okay. So let me think. I had a question. Yeah, okay, so in the case, now we go back to the negative rights again. In the case someone commits a murder and we find the perpetrator, would you? I'm guessing you would allow the death penalty.
Yeah.
Or is that incorrect?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd say death penalty.
Okay, so before in the self-defense case, you justified it by them infringing on your property and your own body. But in this case, the infringement has already happened, and currently they're not infringing on anyone. So, and they still because they commit murder doesn't mean they magically lose their negative right. So how do you justify doing the death penalty?
Sure. So I justify this through Stephen Kinsella's theory, dialogical estoppel, where basically, for them to reject your punishment, like if you were to come up to them and try and kill them, and they were to say, wait, don't kill me, I have a right to not be killed here. That is an incoherent statement for them to say. They are contradicting themselves based on their own conduct. And so they might as well say, glip de glee, de glab de glue. Right? It doesn't do anything. Right? It's not an argument. And it's not possible for them to make an argument that they shouldn't be killed. And that is why, that is where the principle of retribution comes from. So in punishment theory, there are two things, two types of punishments you can have. It's retribution or restitution. Restitution is just basically making the victim whole again, right? You stole something, they're allowed to take their property back, right? But retribution is you're allowed to do the same thing to the perpetrator, presuming that they deliberately did the thing, which is, if they have mens rea, is the technical term.
All right. So you would be against, I don't remember what it's called, but I think it's also called retributive. I'm not sure, but basically forcing the perpetrator into an asylum or somewhere where we focus on helping them become a normal person so they can function within society. You'd be against that.
Yes. So in the base case, the only way, the retribution, it's an eye for an eye. If they killed, you're allowed to kill them. But you could use retribution as a way to enact different punishments. Like maybe instead of killing the person back, you want to get a lot of money out of them. Maybe they're really wealthy. So you say, hey, I'll trade you this right of retribution against you if you give me $10 million. And then you can get money out of them. Or I'll give you back the right of retribution if you spend a year in this prison. Whatever, right?
Okay. So that doesn't really make sense why that should happen. So you're basically saying a guy commits murder. The victim is, of course, it's now dead. So now the legal arbiter can just say, actually, if you give me money, we'll just forget that this happened.
Not necessarily the arbiter. So it would be the person who owns the right of retribution. So that would naturally be the victim. But if the victim's dead, then it passes on to their heir. And if their heir says, give me a bunch of money, and we can forget about
it. Okay. But is it possible that this would lead to a society where rich people technically can just go around committing a bunch of crimes?
Well, anybody anybody who's going around committing a bunch of crimes very quickly, they're going to be ousted from proper society. Like, nobody will rent to them, nobody will let them anywhere near them. Because to have this person around is going to make your insurance rates shoot right up.
Okay. That also makes sense. Let me see here. Then my other question here regarding the NAP, which I think we're going to get into some arbitrary stuff here, but I'm not sure. Basically, who the NAP applies to. So, for instance, I'm guessing you're for animal agriculture, like livestock.
Mhm.
Okay, so why is it that we can say that the NAP doesn't apply to those? And also, how can we also just say that certain humans that we colloquially agree are humans right now, but I might disagree and I'll just say they aren't humans? What's stopping me from doing that and then just not treating them with the non-aggression principle?
Sure. So the principle is that for there to be any sort of law between two beings, two things have to be true. First, both of them have to have free will, which means that they can get into conflicts in the first place, because there is no mutually exclusive actions when it's just, mechanistic behavior. And they have to be able to avoid conflicts. So, for livestock, neither of those conditions are met. So there is no meaning of law between me and a cow. I can't get into a conflict with a cow.
Wait, why can you not get into a conflict with a cow? I mean, let me give a hypothetical. Let's say the cow is eating grass and you just pull the grass out of its mouth. I would guess that the cow would react negatively to that, which would spark some conflict between the two of you.
Well, it wouldn't be conflict in the precise sense. So the way I define conflict is mutually exclusive actions. I'm using action there to mean human action, purposeful behavior. Whereas with a cow, it doesn't have any purposeful behavior because it doesn't have free will.
Wait, but isn't the purpose of eating grass to get fed? Isn't that purposeful behavior?
Well, you could impart that purpose onto them, but the cow itself isn't planning courses of action and having purpose to its conduct. It's just mechanistically going about its life.
I'm not sure if I grant that. So, just to make it a bit easier for me to understand, so if we have let's just take one of the most intelligent monkeys, chimpanzee, would you say that they have free will and purposeful actions, or is it only humans?
I think it's only humans. Maybe some other hominids had
Only
it,
human.
but the only remaining hominids, Homo sapiens, are the only animal I've ever seen evidence that they can form concepts and therefore have free will.
So basically, you're saying if the animal can form concepts, it has free will, and therefore it has they can have a right to be treated through the NAP.
Yeah.
But what does it mean to form a concept? Because couldn't the cow have a concept of I want to eat food because then I satisfy my hunger signals? Wouldn't that be a concept? Or
So a concept basically means a universal, a general category of things. So like man is a concept, computer is a concept, good is a concept. Because I'm not referring to any specific good action, any particular good thing. I'm referring to good as such. And it's only humans that can form these concepts. So I'll give an example from Leonard Peikoff. Basically, everyone knows that dogs love bones. They will eat bones all day long. They'll be the happiest dog in the world if they've got a bunch of bones. But then, why does it never occur to the dog to set up shop with a bone farm, rate the science of boneology to figure out where bones come from and how to make them more efficient and more tastier? Why doesn't it make bone shops with Bone Walmart? And why doesn't it set up a logistics empire to ship bones to all the dogs across the world? It would be the richest dog ever. And the answer is that it never occurs to the dog because he couldn't get the concept of bone. He just goes about his life and he'll see a particular bone and go, that looks tasty. and eat it. And once it's gone, like he just, oh, that was a nice thing. But I don't know to what category it belongs because I can't form the concept bone.
Okay, so would you say that animals who have kind of developed their own little currency within nature and are exchanging those for goods? There are examples of monkeys doing this. Would you say that they have formed a concept?
I would have to know more about the specific examples, which, I suppose you could send it to me on Discord afterwards. But basically, the standard I go off of is if the thing can speak, if it has language, then it's definitely able to form concepts. And only humans have language. Right? There's the cognitive trade-off hypothesis. Like chimpanzees, they can count real well and do other stuff real well, but not even a semblance of a language.
Okay. So would you say that then if a person basically the every part of the brain which is associated with like speaking and having language, if that was removed from a hypothetical human, then they wouldn't have rights?
Yeah, they'd probably be brain dead at that point. Which is in the same legal category as a corpse.
So are we talking about like so would we be talking about they just can't speak, like have some no vocal cords, they just can't get the sounds out, or they don't have the faculties to even think of something to say, if they could say something?
Yeah, it's the latter, that they aren't even thinking on that level. Like, they aren't forming concepts, they aren't doing anything with concepts. I think if you did that to a human, you'd have a brain dead human on your hands, or even just a straight up dead human.
Okay, but like it's possible that they are sentient in another way, like they can still feel pain. And
sure, they might be able to feel pain, but
other stuff.
But they would just be a mechanistic being at that point. Like they wouldn't be able to have any conceptual thought. It would just be pure perception.
So it would be permissible to basically have property rights over these hypothetical humans and farm them for food.
Yeah. Or far more profitably to farm them for organs.
Yeah. All right. I think that settles that. Then I think here I come to my biggest point of contention so far. It would be abortion. So I've been going back and forth for a very, very long time, and now very recently I've heard of this evictionism idea, and it makes sense, but I just have a couple problems with it. So basically, evictionism, if I'm getting this right, let's say you have a 4-week-old fetus and you want to remove it, then you kind of like, I don't know how big they are, you scoop it out on a big spoon maybe, and you try and keep it as intact as possible.
So
is that correct so far?
So the way you would do it is they can induce labor at any point during the pregnancy. And so you just induce labor, and the baby would come out, and you'd very quickly have to put it into an artificial womb. And like all of the technology is there to do this, and they've done it in livestock. So you could even do this with like a brand new embryo.
This exists?
Yeah.
I've actually never heard of this.
Yeah, my friend was going to write a paper on it at some point, but I don't think he got around to that. Like all of the technology is there to save the baby right from conception.
Okay, that I've actually never heard about that. That kind of undermines my future point. But if you'll just humor me,
sure.
Let's assume that this 5-week-old baby or something, there are not these artificial wombs. So there's almost a 100% chance of death once it's removed. So in this case, let's say you make an action, and there's a 1% chance that the next day you have a man lying outside in your backyard, and you have the choice of either letting him sit there for 9 months, just letting him lay there unconscious on the backyard, or you can decide to drag him out, in which case he will instantly die with 99.999% chance. Would you have some responsibility because you knew that man lying on your grass is 100% caused by you taking that specific action which you knew could cause this? Do you have any responsibility in that case?
So, like, you might have a moral responsibility, like it might be immoral to evict him, but you wouldn't have any legal responsibility. You'd be allowed to evict him. You're allowed to evict at any point in the pregnancy.
And this would also be the case if there's a 100% chance that this random guy would wake up in your backyard. If you do this specific action, then you can also just kick him out and basically kill him with almost 100% chance.
Yeah.
There's no. Okay. I guess this basically gets undermined by the fact that artificial wombs exist. Is there like a problem with people grown in these artificial wombs that have some defects?
I don't think
or something.
I don't think there's any defects. I think the government just is slow to accept technologies.
Okay. I have some other questions here. So, are we allowed to take preemptive action? So basically, some guy broadcasts to the entire country that he's going into the shopping mall and he's gonna shoot everyone inside. Are we then allowed to stop him before the action happens, or do we have to at least wait for him to pull out a gun and start shooting?
You could stop him the second he has broadcast that, because that is an active threat. Like, assuming he's not joking or playing a role in a movie or whatever. Like, if he's seriously threatening that he's going to do something at the shopping mall, then yeah, he has already started that conflict.
Okay, what if we just have a really, really strong inference that some guy is about to do something bad? I don't know how this would be, but just imagine you had a really, really strong inference. You're like, this guy is going to pull out a gun and start shooting everyone inside here. But you don't know for sure yet. He hasn't said anything. Would it be permissible to pin him down?
So I would have to know about specifically how these inferences are drawn, because I mean, the guy still does have free will. He has the choice whether to shoot up the place or not. And if he's not made any active threats, he's not demonstrated at all that he's going to do anything, then you're not allowed to do anything about it.
Okay, I guess that would also like apply to the modern day society. That also makes sense. Then, what do you think about false accusations? If someone is purposely trying to defame someone, either by, like, it could be anything. It could be violence, or it could be anything. They're trying to falsely accuse another person of some act. How would this be punishable? Or
so merely defaming someone, like if I just said, that this guy John, he's a rotten individual, and nobody should like him, and he's a racist, and he loves being a creep, whatever, right? Just that isn't criminal. But if I am making this as a report to the police, and I know that the police are going to then kick down his door and arrest him, then I am using the police as a means to attack this person. So that would be a crime.
Mm-hmm. But let's say you're in a court and some guy has taken you to court and he's trying to let's say he has a very accurate deepfake which shows video evidence of you murdering someone. And let's say by some miracle the court finds out, oh, this is actually a deepfake and this guy's full of shit. Are you allowed? Are the people allowed to give this guy a punishment for trying to accuse you of murder?
Yeah, because he was trying to kill me through the means of the court system.
Okay, but what if he just claims that some minor act, maybe you stole something, and he says you should give money to him in compensation for this thing you stole, but
he's trying
you didn't
to rob
actually
me.
steal it. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Then my question is here. So let's say you let's say you're the victim of a guy, and this guy, he cuts off your arm for some reason. You take him to court, and he gets proven to be the perpetrator.
Mm.
Now, what punishment can he face? Could it be that is it like an eye for an eye? Then you just cut his arm off, and you call it quits, or
so he would have to.
Can you start demanding some of it?
So he would have to do restitution and retribution. Retribution in this case would indeed be eye for eye, cut his arm off in the same way. Restitution would be if there are the means available, which there are in the modern world, to get me a new arm or reattach my old arm or whatever it is, then he's got to, fund that as well.
And let's say the arm is dead. There's nothing to do. Should he compensate you in money other than that, or?
Well, so like one thing we could do is cut his arm off and implant it onto my arm, right? Just straight up take his arm. Alternatively, if there are like prosthetics available, then you'd have to pay for that. But if there's nothing in the world that could possibly restitute me, maybe I'm a real stickler or whatever, then no restitution is possible, so it's just the retribution.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes sense. All right, let me see here. So, my other question, would it be immoral to purchase human meat? And I will explain why it possibly could be moral, or not moral, but not be immoral. So basically, you buy this meat. It doesn't mean that you initiated any conflict, but you are basically subsidizing some person who profits off of committing these rights violations and killing these innocent human beings. But you yourself are not doing any action, so would there actually be a problem with me buying human meat?
So, I'll take this on two levels. On the level where he is a murderer, and on the other level where it's all consensual. Like maybe people, they're just like, hey, I want to be eaten by a cannibal, whatever, right? So on the murderer level, if this guy's murdering people and taking their flesh, he doesn't own that flesh. That flesh is properly owned by the heir of that person. They would own the body. So because he doesn't own it, he's not able to trade it to you, so you also don't own it. So you're stealing that meat, effectively. So you're not allowed to have that. Where he's not a murderer, where it's all consensual, where people are just giving their bodies up to be eaten by cannibals, it's not criminal for you to eat that meat, but I still think it's immoral. I don't think it's a good idea to eat human meat. You're opening yourself up to all sorts of crazy, like, diseases and everything. And, like, human meat just, in general, it's a bad idea, for the most part, to eat predators. Because predators accumulate all sorts of heavy metals and everything. Really not a good idea, especially human meat. Like, horrible idea to eat human meat. Because at least with, like, a cow or something, cows do have some diseases that can transfer to humans, but most cow diseases are just going to stick with a cow. But for a human disease, every disease that a human has can also be transferred to humans, obviously, right? So, like, and that is where people get really sick with tapeworms, is if it's a tapeworm that comes from a human. Like, that can really cause a lot of problems for you.
Mm-hmm. All right. That also makes sense. So the question is, if you buy this meat, human meat from this person, you don't know if they have the property right over this meat. They could or they couldn't. You don't know, but you decide to buy this meat, so you're effectively stealing, because in reality, the seller doesn't have the property rights. So does this mean that you can get punished for buying this human meat without knowing?
So I think in the case where there's a seller of human meat, I am not aware of any big scale operation of people giving up their bodies to cannibals. So I think the default assumption would be this guy's a murderer and he's stealing all this meat. So unless you have evidence to the contrary, you have mens rea there. So you could be punished in some way. But if you've just been completely defrauded, and the meat's already in your stomach and everything, like there's not really a whole lot. There's no punishment that could happen. I don't know what punishment could occur there. You weren't the one who stole the meat. You've been robbed yourself of whatever money you paid for the meat. Not robbed, but defrauded.
Ah. Okay, so if you have been defrauded, then does that mean that you can, I don't know, sue or press charges against the seller as well? So you get compensation?
Yeah.
Or...
Yeah, because fraud just means theft by deception. So this guy has deceived you into thinking that he's trading something to you, and that you'll own that thing, but really that isn't the case. So he has stolen the money that you gave to him for that, or whatever it is that you traded for.
So you would get compensated by getting the money you paid back.
Yeah, and in fact double the money back, because you could have restitution and retribution against this guy.
Okay. Yes. Would it be permissible to torture a guy in order to get the code to some bomb which is going to blow up a building and kill 200 people?
So there are certain scenarios where maybe, let's just say for the sake of argument, that literally the only way to exclude this guy from that property, to stop this bombing, is to torture him. Then the torture would be fine. But if that's not the only way, if there are other ways to do it, then it wouldn't be fine, because the torture wouldn't be required.
I mean, I guess there is always an alternative. Like, you could try and guess the bomb code. There's a 1 in a million chance that you guess it correctly, and the other just explodes immediately. Like, in that case, there is an alternative, but it's so unlikely to work.
Yeah, so
torture.
On this type of question, this is where I have to bring up a point from Kinsella. So, from the armchair, as a jurist, I can give you, like, the basic principles where, for defense, if those means are required to stop the invasion, then they're fine. But I couldn't give you, because, like, obviously the next question would be, well, how likely does it have to be, right? From the armchair, not possible to give you that. That is up for the jury, the judge. Like, somebody trying to apply the law in some particular circumstance. Where it might be that it's really, really, like, there's no way we're stopping this bomb. Like, they have all these experts come on being like, no, they would not be able to stop that bomb unless they tortured the guy for the codes. Like, and then, yeah, that's how you'd apply the principle to the specific scenario. But from the armchair, I can't tell you what likelihood it would have to be you'd have to be some sort of expert on that specific situation, which I'm not.
But wouldn't that also be based on basically intuition?
Not intuition. Like there are
The intuition of some expert.
like there are sciences that can be done in these areas. Like it doesn't have to be, oh, like it doesn't have to be like you bring in an astrologer and the astrologer says, well, the stars were telling me that we had to torture the guy. Like it could be like a scientist comes in, whatever area is relevant. Right, the scientist comes in and says, no, it would. It's my professional opinion that it would not be possible, based on my knowledge of this area from studying this area specifically.
So it would be the intuition of the expert.
That's not an intuition, though.
I mean, I guess even if it's empirical, it would be an intuition because, for instance, within science, there's something called like the p-value, where we call basically 0.05. It is the minimum requirement for statistical significance, but that specific value is just an arbitrary number some guys agreed on. Like it's not because this is like the magical number and now this data matters. And
so
right before 0.05, it doesn't matter. So it is also just the intuition.
So like for proper science, and there's actually like really good lectures by Leonard Peikoff on induction. For like proper induction, it's not like an intuition. Like I'm willing to accept, and in many areas of current science, it is the case that it's basically wishy-washy, and they don't understand the philosophy of science at all. I'm assuming that these are all like rational people, and they really are making correct inductions, correct deductions. They're all correct in their method. Now, it is definitely possible for them to come into some error, but then we're treading in towards Cartesian doubt. Like, that is possible for them to make an error, and it is possible. That doesn't mean that they necessarily will make an error. But assuming they're not making any errors or anything like that, like, it is possible to really investigate these scenarios and figure out whether it was required, then you can determine it that way.
I mean, to me, that just sounds like. I mean, first of all, different sciences, of course, they have less error than other sciences. I can say, for instance, with different debates, for instance, whether cholesterol causes heart disease, there's like thousands of studies, each contradicting each other, and there's a bunch of doctors also contradicting each other, and also within genetics and forensics, there's also some possible problems with the statistical calculations. So, for instance, in Denmark, we just saw a documentary where the inference was that this genetic match would be a 1 to 1 million chance of being due to chance, but it was on 3 people within 1 year, where there are only like a couple thousand forensic analyses within that year. So something just doesn't match up there. So I would say that it is kind of different for all sciences, but in the best case, it's just intuition with more or less margin for error, or just less error. I mean, in general, like, but it's still intuition.
I agree that it is possible for scientists to make error, especially when they are all Kantians. Definitely, they're going to be making a lot of errors. But that doesn't demonstrate that they necessarily will make errors.
Wait, what do you mean that if they're Kantian? I don't think they think so much about philosophers.
Yeah, well, they don't think about it. That's the problem. They're just eating the philosophy of the day, which is Immanuel Kant.
And how would this lead to more likelihood for more error, I guess? How would that lead to that?
Because Kant rejects that reality is knowable, which is obviously going to have problems if your job is to know reality.
What does it mean that we know reality?
To study it, to recognize facts, to look out into reality and say, this is the case.
Okay. But I don't think this applies to like empirical science that much.
It does, because any sort of science that you're doing, if you're doing physics, if you're doing psychology, whatever you're doing, you're resting your study on fundamentally primarily epistemology, and then before that metaphysics, right? You're resting it on a prior philosophy, and that prior philosophy is either true or false. Most people's philosophy is false. It's implicit, but it's false.
I mean, I don't necessarily grant that. Like, it would be possible that we don't know anything and we can't know anything. Like, it is possible that the only reason why a bouncy ball bounces off the floor is because for some reason, every time it happens, it just randomly decides to jump off. But it could be that after one fantasilion attempt, it phases through the floor for some unknown reason. Like, it's not impossible. And if it's not impossible, I don't see how you can make it the case that we necessarily can know reality.
So, I consider those types of claims that, well, what if the bouncy ball was just randomly bouncing off and we forgot to account for some other variable? Any sort of claim like that is arbitrary. And the specific way in which it's arbitrary is it relies on Cartesian doubt. So Cartesian doubt is taking doubt as being more fundamental than truth, than knowledge. So if you keep seeing the ball bouncing, you're like, well, what if, at the end of the day, what if a demon was deceiving me into seeing these things, right? But this is a stolen concept fallacy as well. Because error, it's saying, well, I might have made some error in my induction. I might have made some error in this syllogism. I might have made some error here. But it's not possible. Like, let's say somebody's approaching me and saying, I've made some argument for that why taxation is theft or whatever, and they say, yeah, but how can you know that? Because you might have made an error. Humans are able to make errors after all. Well, it's like, that's a lot like going up to an old man sitting in a wheelchair and saying, hey, you might run a marathon to the hospital in 3 minutes and then give birth to twins. And I justify this by saying, well, humans can run marathons and humans can give birth to twins, so therefore it's possible for you. What I'm doing there is I'm taking that it's possible to do these things under specific circumstances, and I'm broadening it to the entire class. That it's possible for man as such. Under his circumstances, the old man in the wheelchair, it's not possible for him to run a marathon to the hospital and give birth to twins. So, what this is doing, and like if somebody came to me and said my syllogism is wrong because I might have made an error, it's not possible for me to point to the non-existence of an error in my syllogism. The burden is on them to point to what the error is. And so, the more fundamental problem with this is that in treating error as being the primary, you're stealing the concept of error. Because what error means is a deviation from truth. So error can't be more fundamental than truth. You can't have erroneous beliefs about everything. It's not possible. You have to first have the concept of true beliefs, and then you can get to the concept of false beliefs.
Okay. I mean, that all makes sense, but I'm going to have to be, I don't know if it's pedantic or focusing on semantics, but we'll just say that I don't believe it's impossible for the man in a wheelchair to do what you described, because it's not impossible under any modal scope or modality that I'm aware of. It's not physically impossible.
Through what means could he possibly, like the man's in a wheelchair, through what means could he possibly run a marathon and then give birth to twins? Like, people in wheelchairs don't run marathons, first of all. And men, old men at that, don't give birth to twins. Heavily pregnant women give birth to twins. right? If they've got twins in their belly. Old men in wheelchairs do not.
But like, when you claim it's not possible, you're saying it's impossible, which, I mean, you have to say under what modality it is impossible.
I don't know what is meant by under what modality.
Modality, it would, for instance, be, is it under a physical modality or under logical modality? So physical, would it break the laws of physics, or logical, would it break the laws of logic? Basically, would it be so impossible that you could not even imagine it in your own head? Like, you cannot imagine a cow that's not a cow, because
so, like, I think
that's the law of non-contradiction.
So it's breaking the laws of physics, and the way in which it's doing that is it's violating the law of identity. Because the law of identity says things are what they are. An old man is an old man. He's not a super athletic pregnant lady. Like, I think it would be a violation of his nature for him to run a marathon to the hospital and give birth to twins.
But wouldn't it, like, it would technically be possible that this man had a uterus and there are two twins?
Well, if he had a uterus
that suddenly popped in
and twins, then he wouldn't be an old man. He would be not an old man. He would be a heavily pregnant woman.
Okay.
And then this heavily pregnant woman would also have to be able to somehow be in a state where she could run a marathon, which, heavily pregnant women, not really.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, but what you're elucidating to is basically that it's very, 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 very unlikely, but not that it's impossible. I mean, it's possible that twins could be inside someone without a uterus.
That I think is an arbitrary claim. Like, how would that be possible? Like what you're saying there is that, well, I might have made an error in my estimation that old men in wheelchairs can't run marathons and then give birth to twins. Where is the error, though?
I mean, what I'm just saying is there is a non-zero chance that this can happen.
I think there's a 0% chance that could happen. Like, there is 0% chance that right now I'm going to get up, run around the world 3 times in 12 seconds, and then give birth to 5,000 babies. 0% chance that happens.
I mean, I don't want to hang on this too much, because I think it doesn't really matter that much for anything I want to talk about. So I think I'm fine with going on from here. Let me see some of the questions I wrote to you. I think I have basically. Oh wait, I have one more thing. Maybe a couple more things for the philosophical aspects. So one of my contentions with the non-aggression principle and libertarian ethics is there's no system by which you can determine trolley problems. So basically, there would be no way to tell whether it's more morally permissible to run over 10 children or run over 10 50-year-old adults.
Well, I mean, there's an easy way
for that matter.
Who owns the trolley and what is their rule when it comes to this?
I mean, in this case, let's just say you own the trolley and you have to basically, or it doesn't even have to be a trolley. It could just be like a hypothetical scenario. You can only choose if 10 children die or 10 adults die, and other combinations of different beings.
Like, what I would need a specific scenario so I could analyze the property rights of this case. Like I can't, you can't have it that, well, libertarianism can't answer a situation where the property rights are left completely undeclared. Like, yeah, you can't, because libertarianism is about property rights. Like, so I would need to know the situation so I could say what the property rights are.
Okay, so I have another scenario to imagine. So imagine either 5 pennies get stolen, 5 arms get cut off, painlessly. Which one of those would be the most moral?
So, like, am I the one, and I'm sitting there going, what will I do today?
Deciding.
But, like, am I sitting there going, like, what will I do today? Either I'm going to steal 5 pennies, or I'm going to cut off 5 arms. Which should I pick? Because I could pick neither. I routinely do.
No, it's not what you're going to pay. It's not what you're going to do. But basically, there's some, let's say, just hyper advanced alien species, which gives you this dilemma. You have to choose one. You cannot choose none of them. In this case, if you had to choose one, and it necessarily would happen.
But in what way am I having to? So, like, are there 2 buttons in front of me, and like, or am I? If I, is there a button where it will?
You just tell the alien.
But then, what if I do nothing?
You just tell the alien. Okay, if you do nothing, then the aliens just do both at the same time.
Okay, so then
you have to tell the alien.
Then the buttons are really which group do I want to save, and from a property right perspective, I'm allowed to save either group. I would choose to save the group of people who are going to get their arms cut off.
And how is this justified without appealing?
Sorry, you cut out. You still there?
Yeah. Did it cut out?
Yeah.
You hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now. You were saying, how is this justified without appealing? And then you cut out.
Yeah, without appealing to intuition.
Well, it's nothing to do with intuition. Like, from the pure property rights perspective, I'm allowed to save either group. I'm saying it's better to save the group of people going to get their arms cut off, because an arm is a lot more important than a penny. And that's outside of law. Like, the law can't tell you that. That's prior ethics tells you that.
Okay, so what about stealing 6 pennies versus, again, 5 arms getting lost?
I would save the people with the arms.
But then you're justifying additional rights violations.
I'm not doing the rights violations.
Binary.
I'm not doing any of rights violations. I'm choosing to save the people with the arms.
But you are directly responsible, or
no, not.
You are at least somewhat responsible for the extra.
No. They're going to do whatever the aliens are going to do, and I'm there able to save one group, and I choose to save the group of people with arms. Like, I'm not responsible at all for the people who got penny pitched.
Yeah, but you could count together like the rights violations of each group. So either there's 5 versus 6 rights violations. You could choose the one with to save the one with 6 rights violations, therefore preventing at least one rights violation that would have otherwise occurred.
Yeah, but I don't have a duty to stop rights violations. Like, I'd be like, legally speaking, I would be fine just doing nothing. But morally speaking, I want to stop those guys from getting their arms cut off.
But morally, now we get back to morally. You said before it's binary. Either it's a rights violation or it isn't.
Yeah.
And there's no difference morally or ethically. I don't know if there's a difference.
Yeah, that's for if I'm committing a rights violation. But I'm not committing any rights violations here.
Yeah, so you would basically appeal to the intuition of what you think is more important.
I don't think that's an intuition, though.
Basically,
like, because I have a lot of experience with humans. I'm a human myself, and I know that arms are a lot more important to flourishing in your life than a single penny. I know that for a fact. Now, if they're going to steal,
it's not a necessity.
it's like they're going to steal like fucking trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, then yeah, maybe that changes the calculus a little bit.
I mean, the problem I have with your statement there is that you're claiming it's a necessity, that the arms are necessarily more important than the pennies, which will mean that in all cases that you could imagine, the arm would be more important than the penny.
Well, I can imagine an insane person who thinks that pennies are more important than arms, but I think they'd be irrational if they thought that pennies are more important than arms. Like, cause I know what's possible to achieve with a penny as against an arm. I know that an arm can achieve a lot more in terms of flourishing.
But is it possible that that penny, through some weird determinism, that it would lead to
Well, I'm not a determinist.
That would lead to that person becoming, let's say, that would lead to that person becoming the first trillionaire and saving millions and billions of lives.
Well, if they're going to become a trillionaire, it's going to be a lot easier for them to do that with an arm than with an extra penny in their pocket. Like, the penny in their pocket is going to be basically irrelevant for their becoming a trillionaire. But an arm, that's pretty important.
Okay, but you say basically, but it's then not a necessity.
I'm saying that
which means you're appealing to the intuition.
I'm saying that a penny is basically irrelevant to your life. Having 2 working arms is not basically irrelevant. That's very, very relevant to your life.
I mean, you could imagine a scenario where directly after the pennies were stolen, some guy came by with an offer for exactly this amount of money, where if the penny was stolen, the guy could not pay for it, and if the money wasn't stolen, the guy could pay for it, which would then accumulate to him. If he bought it, then would accumulate to him becoming a trillionaire and saving billions of humans.
Man, the guy should get a loan. If he's one penny short of this super important purchase in his life, get a loan, borrow it from someone, sit on the street for a while, wait for beg.
Well, it's possible that this is a one-time offer that he can only pay now, and he cannot offer labor either. It's just either you have the money or you don't, and if you don't have the money, it's unlucky.
That would be an insane offer that I've never heard anyone giving to anyone. So that I would not even consider that.
Yeah, but it's possible, which would mean that it's not a necessity. And basically what you're describing here is you're describing your intuition. Your intuition tells you that this is very unlikely, and it's...
No, that's not an intuition thing. Offer. I'm saying that I've never, ever, ever heard of such an offer ever in my life. No, I've never heard it in any history books ever. I don't think that such a deal has ever, ever, ever been made. But I know for a fact that arms are really, really important in every single person's life.
I mean, again, the way you describe how you know it is because you have these experiences, which leads you to these conclusions, and you have this reason, which is the exact description of moral intuitionism.
No, it's not.
That you have these experiences and reasons that leads you to these conclusions.
No, intuitionism means that's an intuition. And I feel this is the case. I'm describing empiricism.
Mm-hmm. So empiricism, but in this case, like, you would agree that we cannot know from empirical facts, that from empirical evidence, that something 100% necessarily must be the case.
I think you can achieve necessity from empiricism. For instance, I think it's through the evidence of the sense. I think all knowledge comes from the evidence of the senses, and I think it's necessarily true for all time, everywhere, that A is A. There is no way for that to be false. It's necessarily true. I also think it's necessarily true that I don't know, fucking Newton, whatever law of Newton we want to pick, right? That if you apply a force to an object, that it's going to keep going in that direction until another force acts on it. I think that's necessarily true for all time and space, forever, all throughout the universe, never will be different. I think it's necessarily true.
It's necessarily true.
Yeah, but getting to Newton's laws, obviously a lot more remote than law of identity. So, yeah, I couldn't give you the entire inductive process up to Newton's laws, but I could give it for law of identity.
Yeah, I'm fine with granting like laws of physics, but it's more about like human outcomes based on different variables being adjusted, because human civilization is super complex and the human body is super complex. I just don't believe that you can, like, maybe an arm would be an obvious example, but maybe losing the tip of your finger would be a less obvious example. And then I don't want to get into like diet interventions, but also like when it comes to interventions with diets and humans, like the evidence is all over the place, and you can't really draw any conclusions. Like you don't get anywhere close to 100% certainty. And in the same case, I think with the arm, you might get close to 100% certainty, but you wouldn't get to exactly 100% certainty, because there is a chance that the lack of an arm will lead to different behavioral tendencies in the people. And for some people, that change in behavior might be the thing that sets them apart and actually helps them grow even more, both economically and in other ways, than if they had an arm.
So, like, I think.
So I would say, based on that, you can't be 100% certain.
So I think that's logically possible, that someone could lose an arm and that makes them a better person or whatever. But there would be no evidence for that when I'm sitting there with the aliens and they're saying, "Who do you want to save?"
Yeah, so you're basically appealing to whatever you believe has the highest probability.
I'm appealing to what the evidence is pointing to would be better for my life. And having productive individuals with an arm is almost certainly, right? All the evidence is pointing towards that an arm is better than a penny. There is no evidence to the contrary. So I achieve certainty, therefore.
No, because you just said almost certain.
Yeah, I was wrong.
And now you finish up by saying certainty.
I misspoke. So it's logically possible for me to make the wrong choice there. But all of the evidence that I've ever picked up throughout my entire life points to arms being more important than pennies.
Okay. And this would be an inference you're drawing, right?
Yes.
You're drawing an inference from data or evidence.
Yeah.
Again, I do not see how this is not just appealing to what has the higher probability, because you say it's logically possible, but wouldn't it also be physically possible? Like, it doesn't break the laws of Newton or radiation laws or any of those laws. So I don't really see how
it does in subtle ways. I don't really see how it's like for a penny to be more important than an arm, arms would have to be different to what they are, or pennies would have to be different to what they are.
Not necessarily.
Like,
why would that have to be the case?
People would have to be different to how all the evidence points to them being.
Like what you said, is logically possible. The example I named was also physically possible. Like, and I'm pretty sure there even exists anecdotes of this being the case, where some person gets a disability, and then for some reason they just get hyper motivated to start working hard, and they build a business empire and they get rich from that. I'm pretty sure there already exists plenty of anecdotes with that. So it's not just
sure.
physically and logically possible. It's
then
it is unlikely, but it has happened.
I can accept that it's unlikely. Then we can still proceed. It's unlikely.
Yeah.
But flash to me, sitting on the mothership, deciding which group to save. I have no evidence about any of these people I'm going to be saving. I have no evidence that any of them would have their lives improved by losing an arm. No evidence for that at all. But I have a lot of evidence from my own life that arms are very, very important. Productivity. So I would save the arms. I think I should save the arms.
Well, I mean, you do have some evidence that it's unlikely, but it's possible that not saving the arms.
Well, I'm saying I don't have evidence about these people in particular. Like I have evidence that some people,
if that's the case, then you don't have.
Well, I have evidence that some people become productive after getting a disability, but almost every single instance, it is way less productivity after they get the disability. And I have no evidence about these people in particular, right?
Yeah. Yeah, then you would basically appeal to what you believe has the higher probability of being the case.
Yeah, based on all the evidence I've collected in my
beneficial.
life.
Yeah.
Like even just on the root level,
all right.
If I save the arms, then I can go down and shake their hand, and that feels nice.
All right. So wouldn't this also be appealing to consequences?
Yes.
A bit.
But that doesn't mean that the consequences are justifying or changing the law or anything like that. Because, again, I can make any choice I want here, legally. But I think it's better to have arms for my own life, right? For my own life, it's better if I have more productive people around me.
Okay. So that makes sense. Let me see here. So this is one conflict that I've had in my head, and I'm not quite sure what the answer to this would be. There's a question I've written. So basically, if someone owns a house, another guy, he comes and says he wants that house. Not that he's gonna take it from him, but he just, that's a cool house. I would want that house if I could. And then the house owner, for some reason, agresses. He takes offense and punches him in the face. Does the house now belong to the non-aggressor?
No.
Why not? Because from what I've heard you say and all the libertarians say, it's basically that the person who has the property right is basically the non-aggressor, the one who didn't initiate the conflict.
Yes, but the conflict here isn't over the house. It's over the person's face who got punched.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. So, I think that was basically most things. Oh, I do actually have one more question. Oh, two actually. I just saw it. So, let's say you have pollution. You drive your car and it pollutes benzene, and this benzene leads to, on average, a couple more people getting lung cancer or something. Will you be breaking the NAP?
So, this is general in epistemology. You would have to link the specific polluter to the specific infraction that's going on. So, if I'm claiming that I got lung cancer from someone somewhere out there polluting, that's a nothing statement, right? I'm not actually making any specific claim there. So I would have to say, I got lung cancer from that guy's car. He polluted me, and I got lung cancer from his car. I'd have to show a direct cause and effect there, not just, someone might have given me lung cancer. That does nothing.
Mm-hmm. So, in this case, there would be nothing to do with if every person, or let's just say many people decided to pollute something super, super toxic, which then ended up killing 99% of the population. Like, there'll be nothing to do about that, or what?
So I mean, there is such a thing as pollution forensics, which it was a field that died off thanks to the Environmental Protection Agency. But they used to be able to track down, if some old lady's laundry got dirtied by pollution, they'd be able to track down the soot particles and figure out the exact factory it came from, and they'd get an injunction against that factory to put filters in their chimneys. They wouldn't pollute anymore, and they'd have to buy her new clothes. Like, this is a thing that you can do, but if it's not a thing, like if I'm just not even making a specific claim against someone, like I'm not making a claim.
So, like, you wouldn't be able to say that companies in general ought in thing which produces this toxic gas because there's such a high death rate from people inhaling this gas. Like, you wouldn't be allowed to like globally ban this gas particle from being polluted.
You wouldn't be allowed to ban it from being used or even put out into the environment. You would be allowed to ban it from being used as like a chemical attack, like where I just pump it out of my chimney and all my neighbors die. Like, duh, I'm the one who did that.
But that sounds exactly like the other case where you're polluting it and
No, because in this
there's
case
some big
where
factory polluting.
in this case where I pump out of my chimney and all my neighbors die, there's a very clear cause and effect there. That I have pumped chlorine gas out of my house or whatever, and all my neighbors start dying, or Zyklon B, or whatever it is. Like, obviously, and the medical examiners can come along and go, yep, they died from Zyklon B, and everyone knows that I just pumped a bunch of Zyklon B into the area. But it's pretty clear where it came from, right?
Yeah, but let's say they figure that out. And they also figure out that there's another factory that's going to produce a product. And it's very common knowledge that producing this product will end up polluting a lot of Cyclone B, which could kill the entire town. Like many thousands of people. Are we allowed to take like preemptive action and just say, no, you can't produce this, or you need to find a filter which could
Yeah, you'd be allowed to say, Mr. Factory Owner, no, you're not allowed to pump a bunch of Zyklon B into the town.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then I have so basically if you have actions, you have multiple different actions you can take every day, and all of them include risks of breaking the non-aggression principle in some way or another, or killing people. It could be driving the car. There is a chance that you lose focus for 1 second and a car crash happens, people die. It could also be that some random pedestrian just decides to jump in front of your car. There's always, with all actions, some chance that a right violation is going to happen. So I'll say, do you have a moral obligation to constantly think about what actions have the least chance? Like, if there's an action you do where there's a 99% chance of someone dying, you're allowed, like, are people allowed to say you can't do that? Like, it's illegal for you to do that.
So I think any action has a chance of being an aggression under certain circumstances. Like if you're being negligent, if you're running around swinging a knife about, yeah, then you've got a risk of breaking the non-aggression principle. But if you're going about your life normally and you're cognizant of property rights and all that sort of stuff, then I don't see the risk of breaking the non-aggression principle.
Mm-hmm. And how would you determine negligence in like an objective way?
So it is not taking into account relevant factors. Like, I'm evading or I'm drifting.
And why would this not be taking into account relevant factors?
Because if I'm evading, then I'm deliberately putting aside those relevant factors. If I'm drifting, then I'm just not paying attention to what I'm doing. I'm just running on autopilot. So I'm going to end up not accounting for relevant factors.
All right. Then that also makes sense. How do we decide whether or not children are mature enough to make their own decisions? Basically, if we can arbitrarily decide to get guardianship of some people, who's going to set a definitive line? Yeah.
So the principle for when one is a child, in the legal sense, is when they cannot express their will. So a person who is passed out on the side of the road in the snow, they are a child in the legal sense. And so the paramedics can come along and get them into a hospital and resuscitate them, yada, yada, yada. So the standard is when they are able to express their will. And this can be different for different things. So, like, that's why it's probably fine for your 13-year-old kid, medical kid, to, like, go on a paper round to make extra money or open a lemonade stand, right? Because they can probably understand what that involves. But it's probably not okay for them to go down into a coal mine and be the guy who, blows up any, like, natural gas deposits. That's going to be very, very dangerous. They probably don't understand what they're doing there, so they can't express their will over that thing. And that is the general standard. And again, the way you'd apply this is you'd have people who are an expert in mental development. They would determine, they could interrogate this person to see if they understand what it is that they're saying, whether they're able to express their will over that thing. If they're not, then they're a child in that respect.
Okay, the problem I have with that is it also just sounds like an appeal to authority.
It's not because these people are experts that it's true. It's these people are recognizing whether or not the person is actually expressing their will in this case. And for that, you need to understand what it means to express your will in that case.
The problem is that, like, many experts have different opinions on what it means when they're ready to express their will, and when people are mature enough. So,
well, I don't think there are
psychologists.
I don't think any psychologist, professional psychologist, has even heard of this standard for childhood. So I reject that. There are all sorts of differing opinions going around on it. Like, I think they just don't even consider the legal analysis at all.
Well, I can say that for maturity to be able to take decisions for yourself, which is a thing that's talked about a lot, it differs all the way from like 3 years old to 25 years old. Like,
right,
depending on which psychologist you ask.
But that demonstrates that they aren't considering the standard that I gave, because the standard I gave didn't say, oh, at 18, suddenly a switch flips in your head and you're an adult in all respects, whereas before you were a child in all respects. I'm saying, in different respects, you are either able to express your will over that thing or you're not, right? And there is no universal age where everybody suddenly has a switch flip in their head and then they're able to do everything, right? It depends on the specific individual.
Yeah, I know, but it's based on like averages of that age. So if they feel, so some psychologists would then say, okay, you're 20, but you act like a 25-year-old, which is my standard, then
right,
you're
but
good to go.
That's just a difference in how they're doing their averaging, how they're fuzzying together these groups. Like, is it the case that if you took a bunch of experts who actually understood this standard and you had them investigate a single individual to determine whether they could consent to being a roughnecker on an oil rig? Is it the case that they end up coming to wildly different conclusions? Like, I don't think that experiment has ever been done.
No, but is it possible that, like, I don't know how it would work practically, but let's say that this kid gets examined by some psychologist, and the psychologist says, "Yes, you're good to go. You're an adult now." What if the adult now, the newly formed adult, will now say, "I want a second opinion," and the second opinion just says, "You're not quite there yet." That seems relatively likely for me, especially considering like the randomness of people. Like, I know myself and many other people, if they just take the same survey twice in a row, the answers are going to be quite different the more time you get to think about it. So it's possible that randomly you answer questions which qualifies you or disqualifies you in different cases, but having basically the same mental state.
Right, but then one of these people are making an error in their investigation. Because two things can't be true at the same time. But rather, a thing and its negation can't be true at the same time. It can't be true that somebody is an adult in one respect and also not an adult in one respect. So one of the people are making an error, but again, that is possible.
Not really.
For well, yeah, because one's the negation of the other. Like A can't be A and non-A can't both be true.
No, because it kind of needs to be differentiated. It's like subjective ethics is not contradictory, because some people believe murder is cool.
Well, I don't think it's subjective cool. Though. Like, I think it's actually hold on. I think it's actually the case that either this person is able to express their will in this area, or they're not. And I'm saying that you would have to have people who are able to investigate whether it's the case that the person is able to express their will or not. And if you have two contradictory answers, contradictions aren't true, so one of them's wrong.
Okay, what I will say here is that basically in this case we have no like 100% objective way of measuring whether someone is capable of this. So in this case, it wouldn't.
Why
be
do we have no objective way
because
of
the
doing
difference?
that?
Well, no, let me just say it quickly. The difference here would be between the different subjects. So it wouldn't be the same person saying that this kid is both a kid and not a kid. It would be this person saying it's a kid and this other person saying it's not a kid.
Yeah, that's a contradiction still. So one of them has to be wrong. They can't both be correct. Like, for them to both be correct would mean that this person's both a child and not a child. That's a violation of identity.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the problem is, I guess we wouldn't really have a way of saying which one is correct.
No, you do. You appeal to reality.
Again,
you actually, either the person is able to express their will or they're not. And that it's possible for people to make an error in this judgment. That doesn't prove that they necessarily will make an error. Like,
no, I don't. I'm not saying they necessarily will, but I'm saying there's a decent possibility that it will happen.
Even that there's a possibility that somebody will make an error in applying this standard, that doesn't negate the standard.
Sure, but I would say if there's a decent chance of error, and it's also based on basically a qualified person who gives their subjective opinion.
No, not subjective opinion. I'm not saying you just go to a psychologist and say, hey buddy, what do you reckon? And, what are the stars saying today? And they roll some dice, and then they say, and they read their tea leaves. And they say, yeah, he's an adult. I'm not saying do that. I'm saying this person, you're actually investigating this individual to determine whether they're expressing their will or not.
Yeah, of course, but different psychologists will give different amounts of credence to different ways the kid might answer to some questions.
And one will be right and one will be wrong.
So in that case, it would be subjective in what they value and what they give
that's
credence
not subjective. Because what they should give credence to, that's determined by reality. Right? So one of them is going to be correct about the weighting, one of them is going to be incorrect.
Okay, but we don't know. How do we know that one of them is or isn't correct?
Well, you'd have to. I'm not a psychologist, right? So I can't answer this, especially when I don't even know which one's saying what and why they're based. Like, what are their arguments, right? Like, you have to investigate it. Like, this is the same way with, like, if I just came up to a physicist and I said, I actually disagree that planets are orbiting around the sun. I think it's all a dream in the head of God, and he projects these images into my eyes. Like, I mean, clearly one person's making a more coherent argument there.
Yeah, but I would still say, like, it's still subjective, and in this case, it would not be like such an obvious. This person is making a more coherent argument. This one is not.
No, I think it is obvious if you understand the subject area. It's going to be obvious which one's correct and which one's incorrect.
Well, not really. So let's say you have this debate between these two psychologists, and the differing in opinion is based on what they give more credence to. How do you decide which one is correct in what they give credence to? Like, you can't do that. It's subjective
you'd have to analyze
that this psychologist values this.
Well, so you'd have to analyze what credence should be given to, right? And that question can be answered. Just, it might be difficult, and I obviously can't do it sitting here with hypothetical psychologists and a hypothetical survey that they may or may not use. I'm just saying that it is possible to determine these things.
Yeah, it's possible.
So it could be done.
Just say it's,
and so, like, none of this comes close to negating the standard.
But the problem is that it's unlikely, because psychology and social sciences is one of the weakest sciences, because there's a big problem with reproducibility.
That's because they all follow.
Super random.
That's because they all have a bad philosophy. So they're not doing proper psychology. Like, when it comes to proper psychology, it's all very much agreed, right? Objectivism. Like, objectivist psychologists are not really disagreeing a whole lot.
So you're saying if they just so if you say that they reject Kant, which some of them probably have never heard of, then magically they'll start agreeing.
Not magically.
And suddenly these studies will start.
Like, if they have the correct philosophy and they're applying it through the correct method, then they're going to come to the same conclusions.
Okay, so I don't grant that, because it sounds like you're saying so either they accept Kant, let's just say that either they accept Kant or they accept objective reality. With Kant, then what they're doing is they're drawing an inference based on probability. With objectivity, they're just saying this probability leads to this statement getting truth value.
Moreover,
so in both scenarios, they're reaching.
Moreover, with psychology in particular,
they're reaching the same conclusion.
Like, when they're in the Kantian tradition, they're coming on from John Dewey, and they're saying they're rejecting free will. They're rejecting the mind and then trying to study the mind, right? That's obviously they're going to run into horrible issues there. And they're going to say, well, you're just preconditioned to believe this way because of your upbringing. They're going to focus on completely the wrong things. Whereas if they accept that the mind is a real thing and that it is a faculty of perceiving reality, then they can come to some actual science here. But if they're running around with Dewey, they're not going to do that.
Okay, so first of all, like, there are two assumptions you're making there. First of all, that free will exists, and the other one that that psychologists work by a standard where they say free will doesn't exist, and that changes their results.
Moreover, they're saying the mind itself doesn't exist. So there is no such thing as the mind. That is their implicit philosophy, and then they're trying to study the mind. And I can prove free will if you want.
I mean, okay, I'm very interested in the free will, But first of all, I will say I have psychology at school, and I've learned a bit about psychologists, and I've also looked at it in my free time. And never have I ever heard something about someone rejecting free will.
So, like, have you ever
I
heard?
don't really know where that comes from.
Have you ever heard anything about like SK conditioning? I think it's called. Like where it's just like, oh, you're preconditioned. I don't know if that's the actual name. Where it's like just, oh, he's got certain inclinations, biological inclinations. He's just preconditioned to operate in this way, and it's his upbringing. He doesn't have a choice about it. Like that type of thing. When they're talking about conditioning, they are equating man with an animal. That there is no free will there. That's the implicit premise.
I mean, if you oversimplify psychology, I mean, that's more talking about the theories of psychology and not so much.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Like the theory they're operating upon is based on a false philosophy.
So are you saying that it's incorrect to assume that childhood experiences
determine your adult
quite predictively leads to adverse outcomes in future life. In future.
I'm saying that if they're operating on the premise that if you had a certain childhood, then you're going to turn out a certain way, that is a false premise because that rejects free will. If free will is true.
Okay, then I guess before then we need to get to free will, but first I'd like to give my case for why I believe free will is not the case. Currently, I believe in determinism, but with all other beliefs, I'm of course open to change if I'm persuaded. So my case against free will is, of course, determinism. For me, it's quite intuitively the case that all, I don't know if it's effects are caused by a preceding cause, basically.
I agree.
That's what I'll say. And also, I will say with the multiple world hypothesis, this further illustrates my point about determinism. So basically, if we assume that every time some different action could happen, the universe splits for each scenario that could have happened. Every time something could have happened. So with this case, it would be that there are fantastillion amounts of universes with your consciousness, and you are randomly assigned to this one where this specific action is happening. This would lead to the conclusion that there is no free will because you're just randomly assigned to an alternative universe.
Yeah,
and all sorts of actions could have happened in all of them.
So I completely reject multiple worlds. There aren't multiple worlds. There's one reality, the one we're in. And I'm not like some floating wraith who could have joined any universe. I randomly joined this one. I am me, and I start with this reality. This is the reality. There aren't other ones. And that there is a law of causality. That cause and effect is true. That does not give you determinism. It only gives you determinism under a certain understanding of what causality is. The mechanistic understanding, where it's a billiard ball metaphysics, right? But the law of cause and effect, it doesn't say that any antecedent circumstances lead to necessary consequent circumstances. That isn't properly understood what it says. What the law of what the law of causality says is it's the law of identity applied to action. That given what a thing is, it will act in a certain way under certain circumstances. And I am what I am. I have a certain nature. And the way I act under certain circumstances is to choose. Right? That doesn't negate, that doesn't require a violation of causality at all.
I think it does, because what you gotta realize is that your choices come from physical changes in the real world. So either if it's ions moving across the body and giving nerve signals, or if it's chemicals influencing your decision making. It is some physical component that can be measured and observed that causes that change. So
Hold on.
therefore, I think it's
that you can measure it, and that you could give a physical explanation of it. That does not demonstrate that it's not a real thing, right? Giving a physical explanation of choice doesn't show that choice isn't real.
well, you gotta look at how is choice formed. Is formed from this physical feature, which then leads to this physical feature, which then leads to this, leads to this, leads
Right,
to
but
this.
why do all of these steps have to
on.
be deterministic?
Well, what I would say is that if they aren't deterministic, then it might break the laws of physics. So, for instance,
Why would it break the
you
laws
have
of physics,
Newton's. So, I would, for instance, say refer to Newton's law: action equals reaction. So basically, physical things within the real world are subject to these laws, which can predict their movement if all variables are taken account for. So, for instance, the movement of a ball in the air would be able to 100% accurately be predicted with gravity and air resistance and possibly some other physical effects, which means that if all physical properties are taken into account, then all that's gonna happen is can be predicted basically, and it necessarily must be able to be predicted.
So Newton,
if all variables are taken into account.
Newton didn't study the mind ever, right? Newton's laws do hold true universally within a particular domain, and that is the domain of the motions of bodies. But there's more to the universe than just the motions of bodies. And to demonstrate this, I'll ask, like, how did you validate that determinism is true? Because surely you must be predetermined to be a determinist. But what you're predetermined to believe, that doesn't make that thing true, because it predetermined me to believe the opposite thing. So how are you going about validating that determinism is true, rather than just blindly believing it? How do you know that you didn't make an error there?
Isn't this like the exact same thing you criticized before, like the Cartesian?
No, I'm not making
it's called.
I'm not
something.
I'm not making the claim that it's possible under certain circumstances to make an error, not under others. So therefore, it's always possible. I'm saying that yes, there are certain circumstances where it's possible to not make an error, and that's when you're deliberately choosing the correct method, but you reject choice. So how did you do that step of validation if you're not deliberately choosing reality over fantasy? Because you can't choose reality over fantasy.
So randomness can also come with the right result. Like, very simple to prove this.
But how did you validate?
You think of
hold on. How did you validate determinism? How did you validate anything?
How I validate it. So if we talk about the logic within my head, it would be through the physical laws of how physical entities
but if you're wrong about all that,
interact.
If you're wrong about all that, you have no choice about it. You're just going to believe it no matter what. That you have this concept of validation relies on the prior concept of volition. You need choice to have validation. It's a stolen concept again.
No.
It is.
I don't grant that.
It's not about whether you grant it or not.
How is it a stolen concept?
Because for you to have validation, what it means to validate something is that, hey, I've got this belief. I could have chosen a wrong belief. I could have implemented incorrect methods. So I need to check that I chose the correct methods. Right? It's an epistemic norm. Epistemology itself gives you epistemic norms. It's telling you how to choose, which way to choose to operate your mind in order to achieve truth. Because if you're just automatically attuned to reality, then everybody would just believe the same things. There wouldn't even be a meaning of belief at that point. You would just do whatever you're doing. You just be an automaton, right? It's that you have choice that you can err. You can't have error. You can't have truth. You can't have belief if you're just an automaton.
So
that's why validation comes from volition.
Well, then I will just say, yes, I can't validate it, but within my worldview, you also can't validate yours.
But then if you can't...
Hold on. I would just argue that's a false assumption.
Hold on. But then if you can't validate determinism on determinist premises, it's a self-defeating position. Right? And so then even your argument for determinism before, all of epistemology is gone without volition. So you can't even have the epistemology required to tell you that the Newton's laws, right? There is no Newton's laws without free will. Like there's nothing.
Well, is it possible? Is it possible to imagine that through determinism, that some humans just, let's just say one human invented like philosophy and thought of all these different things because of determinism? Like determinism just determined that this person was going to figure this out.
Figure it out. They wouldn't figure it out.
Deterministically led to more people think about that. So you have the advent of epistemology.
No, not epistemology.
And people...
It wouldn't be epistemology. It would be particles playing epistemology.
Sure.
Right, and it's possible to imagine that, but it's an invalid hypothetical, right? Because that's assuming, first of all, no free will. So there is no hypothetical at all. That's denying causality. That's denying that man is what he is, right? So it's assuming a contradiction. So it's out on those grounds, and that I can imagine it doesn't make it true. It's an arbitrary claim.
Sure.
Like I think determinism is completely out then.
I still don't see the case against it. It sounds more like you saying, well, it doesn't seem correct.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't seem correct. I'm saying on the determinist's own premises, he cannot validate anything. He has no knowledge, so he can't know determinism. He can't even believe determinism. He can only just be a parrot. And parrots don't make arguments.
Well,
so I don't have to listen to an argument from a parrot.
Well, I don't. So it seems like you're also making the claim that we can have beliefs then. So it's...
No, I think we can have belief. I believe that we can have beliefs, but the determinist, he doesn't think that.
Yeah.
If he's honest about his position.
I don't see the problem with that.
Because then the determinist isn't saying anything. Like, you may as well come along and say, hey, I'm going to prove determinism to you. Glip de glap glula. Like, it's like, okay, well, that's not an argument. Right? On the determinist premises, he can't make arguments.
So if I grant that, that doesn't mean determinism is false. Like, if anything, it's just as likely to be possible as right before.
No. Don't talk about likelihood.
As in any case.
Like, what's the likelihood? What does that mean? Right? That's a really remote concept, which you're stealing. Right? You're stealing these concepts. Like, you don't get to the concept of likelihood without first having epistemology. And you reject, as a determinist, that epistemology is even a thing. There is no knowledge.
Yeah, but I have like a concept of what likelihood is in my head. Like, I don't need to understand epistemology.
Well, on the determinist, how do you get concepts? Like, if you're going to be a determinist, then you got to be a nominalist.
I was a nominalist.
So a nominalist has it that there isn't actually such a thing as a concept in reality. It's just an arbitrary label. And if you're a determinist, then yeah, these are just going to be arbitrary labels because you're just going to be an automaton spouting random noises that have no connection to each other, and there are no propositions. Like, for there to even be a proposition, there has to be choice. Like, I don't have. This is why I don't argue with rocks. I don't go to a rock and say, "Hey, Mr. Rock, I'm going to prove to you that taxation is theft." Because the rock can't argue, and the determinist says that he can't argue. Like, why would I hear an argument from someone who claims that they can't argue? But how could the determinist argue?
Oh, that would be simply just the deterministic physical properties that determine that at this point in time, I'm going to be speaking with you about this, and
but what makes that an argument? Be saying? Because there is no validation anywhere. There's no logic. Because logic means because logic is this is how you should orient your mind in order to achieve truth. But the determinist, it says that you can't orient your mind in any way in particular. You're just going to do whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are no propositions on the determinist worldview.
I mean, even if I grant that, like, I don't see the problem. Like, it's like saying if a person says no statements can be proven to be true, and then you say, well, that statement can be proven to be true. Like, I mean, that statement wouldn't really matter to a person who believes that.
Right, but then they just defeat themselves.
I believe we're just autonomous.
But such a person should make like Cracklis and shut up, right? But they can't make any propositions. Like, why would I hear a proposition from them?
Well, because deterministically, you've been predetermined to listen to it.
But there are no arguments then. Like, so the determinist is saying there are no arguments. There is no knowledge.
Sure.
So it's not even a position at that point.
Okay.
Like that defeats itself.
I will. All right, I'll take it. I'll take a note in the back of my head, and I'll think about it. Because it's an interesting view you come with. I've never heard this case for free will, so I'll think about it. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, so I think we could probably stop there because I need to go to the toilet.
That's all right.
Yeah.
That's all right with me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, though. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be here to speak with you.
Thank you. Yeah,
it was a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll see you.
I'll see you too. Bye-bye.
Yep. All right. Boop.